Hi, my name is Jasonda Desmond, and I'm a customer education expert.
My guest today is Jasonda Desmond, who is the Director of Operations at Leah Chang Learning, a women-led digital learning agency. She has spent the last 10 years building and delivering outcome-focused, scalable customer education programs for B2B SaaS products. In this episode, we talked about how customer education programs have become a key differentiator in the market, helping with sales, adoption, and retention. We discuss how product and customer education teams can work together to develop strategies and provide resources for customers, as well as internal training and enablement. Whether you have a team in charge of customer education, or CE as Jasonda calls it, or if you're doing it yourself, this is a great episode to understand the value of those programs and think about them early on in the product lifecycle. Hi, it's Magali. I wanted to thank you so much for listening to Product Perspectives. The audience is growing every week, and it's my pleasure to bring you new episodes with great content. I'd love to have your feedback about the format, the quality, the types of guests, and anything else you want to share with me. I've put the link to a survey in the podcast notes, so please take 2 minutes to fill it in. As a product manager, you know how important feedback is. And if you like the podcast, please share it with your friends, colleagues, network, and give it a 5-star rating and review on your podcast platform. Thank you.
Welcome to Product Perspectives, the podcast for product people that gives a voice to their stakeholders, hosted by Magali Pellissier. Each weekly episode shows you the other side of the product with interviews of the people who contribute to making products a success. They are engineers, writers, marketers, support analysts, UX designers, or even salespeople. Not only will they get the credit they deserve, but they will share their perspectives on what makes a good product and product manager. Stakeholder management is a key skill for product managers. So just as you're obsessed with listening to your customers, let's hear from your stakeholders.
Thank you very much, Jasonda, for being with me today, because you are the first customer education specialist in this podcast. I really look forward to hearing from you.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you, Magali.
Great. So let's start with the beginning and the definition. What do you mean by building customer education programs?
So a customer education program combines learning strategy, content, and delivery methods to help customers learn what they need to know in order to effectively use your product to achieve their goals.
Right. And I'm sure lots of product managers, they know that this exists, but the ones who aren't lucky or are in startups, they have to do it themselves. So there's lots of companies who don't have such roles, either because they don't think they need it, because they don't have the budget, they're not aware. In the end, the product manager ends up doing this customer education work themselves. What would you say to these companies who don't have a dedicated person, and in the end, product manager or product marketing or technical writers or even sometimes customer success has to run it for them?
Yeah, it's actually pretty common for customer education programs to start on the side of the desk of people in other teams. As you said, product, customer success, marketing is often involved. And there can definitely be some overlap in the activities and the types of materials created. Everyone's doing it even if they don't know what they're doing. They still have to do it because the customers come to them and say, I need training, right? So what a customer education expert will bring to the table is a deep understanding of learning science in order to build a program that will be truly effective. And they'll also know how to build an evaluation strategy to measure that effectiveness. So I like to tell people I don't deliver training, I deliver results, because that's really what it's about at the end of the day.
I love that. I don't deliver training, I deliver results. That's awesome. I think it resonates when you say everybody's doing it, but people don't really know that they're doing it, and we just have to do work. But so makes me do the parallel with user research. Some companies don't have a UX researcher because they think that we can just ask questions to the users. But there's a whole science behind how you ask questions that makes the result much more qualitative than just having random people doing it.
It's so true.
Right. So you told me that you consider a customer education program like a product. And I'm quite interested in that because that means we share the same vision. So what does it mean in practice?
So most customers, especially in B2B software, have had poor experiences with user training and adoption in the past. So they have really high expectations for the learning experience when they're evaluating a new system that they want to purchase. You may see those requests coming through in your RFPs, like, what does your training look like? What kind of help documentation do you have? What's your support availability? All of those questions are really about, how are you going to help me figure out how to use this? So that means that customer education is actually a differentiator in the marketplace, just like any other product offering. And investing in that can lead to better sales adoption and retention. So I would say, if you're thinking about this, when you evaluate your competitors, don't just look at their feature set, look at their learning offerings. And you'll see that a lot of companies are not investing in those offerings. And so it's a great advantage for those that do.
Great point. And I guess the way to do that work is going into their website, finding the content, and maybe reading some reviews to see what other customers are doing.
Yeah, I love to see the reviews are saying the product is great, but it took me forever to figure it out. I'm like, I know exactly what's going on here.
Right. So you said my role is to deliver results. So what is results? Let's give some examples of some successful implementations of such programs and which metrics you used to determine success.
In my previous role, I was at Office Space Software, which is a B2B hybrid workspace platform. And I joined in July 2021, and they were experiencing a huge surge in growth due to new customers needing hybrid workplace solutions due to the pandemic. So when I started, they were training all of their customers in one-to-one live sessions with 2 trainers, and they were completely out of capacity. There was a 2-week wait time to get a training session. And so sales was complaining, everybody was complaining. So I hired one more trainer for the team just to address the immediate capacity issue. And then the next thing I did was I designed a blended learning strategy that was built by 2 instructional designers. So that actually allowed the company to scale their capacity to handle the number of sessions it would have taken them 12 trainers to deliver with only 3 trainers. So at the end result, we achieved a 3x increase in capacity with a 1x increase in staffing, and the wait times were permanently eliminated due to the redesign of the program. And the quality of the training was also improved because we had, a very clear standard. We had redesigned the training according to the roles of the users as well. So they were really getting the information they needed right away.
Awesome. And I guess the question is, what is the main challenges you faced along the way? Were there some particular problems and some roadblocks in implementing that?
I would say the main challenges were really around making sure that we were well aligned with the company goals and what they wanted to accomplish with the customers. So it's kind of challenging. Sometimes CE is coming in as this new thing and you're like, oh, customer success is already doing some of this. Marketing is already doing some of this. Product is already doing some of this. Who's this new guy who's coming in with all these new ideas? So I think that, that was something that, kind of held things up a little bit. And I think if there had been more buy-in from leadership, maybe to bring those teams together and unite them around that common purpose, then I think that things could have gone a little bit faster.
And you make a good point about this function being new sometimes because, as you said, when you start a company, probably some people are doing it without really knowing.
Exactly.
It really depends on company's maturity level and the stage of development. So what is a typical journey you've seen from people not having this function to people, I guess, thriving in this function?
For sure. So it's very common for B2B startups to not consider the learning needs of their products in their growth plan. So this is kind of what happens usually. They build something, they put it out into the world, and they find out later that customers need help understanding how to use it because the customers themselves are asking for that help. So then they have customer success managers train the customers on Zoom. They'll ask marketing to throw some product documentation together. Often you'll see product managers doing webinars themselves or, trying to get that information out there. And the next step is usually they add a dedicated onboarding specialist or training specialist and a technical writer to kind of handle that workload. But the real challenge happens when the company starts to grow rapidly and they realize we can't just keep adding people to be able to meet this need. We can't hire dozens of trainers or whatever it is. So that's usually at the point where they bring in someone like me to create that strategy to help them handle the challenge. But the truth is, if companies could start thinking of that customer education strategy earlier in their journey, they can get ahead of the game because it's more proactive and less reactive. And you have an opportunity to save money and time by kind of thinking about that at the beginning. And, of course, it doesn't make sense to hire a dedicated full-time customer education person for an early stage startup, but you can definitely hire a consultant or somebody to help advise you at the beginning.
Yes, and if I think of the key metrics that startups have with their product, it's generally around conversion, adoption, retention. Mm-hmm. And they're not going to get that if the product is not good, of course, but if they don't have this customer education program, especially in the B2B sector, to mm-hmm. help those customers move along that journey. So you're right about being more proactive and not having customer education as an afterthought. We forgot, so we need it now.
Yeah, and I think that it's important to remember that, just because your product needs education doesn't mean that your product isn't good. It means it's complicated. And a lot of B2B software is fairly complicated, or it's things that people only do once in a while. If somebody does a task every single day, no matter how complicated it is, they're going to get the hang of it. They're going to remember. But if they only do it once in a while, they're not. They're going to need help, right? Or if it's something they've never done before, they don't have any, base of knowledge to be able to adopt that. So, I kind of tell people, like, can your mom or dad figure out what it is your software does and use it by themselves? If they can't, you probably need customer education to help you with that.
I think that's a great point about the first thing, because some product managers who are listening to this episode may be thinking, well, if we need customer education program, that means the UX is not simple enough. But you're right. There's not a direct correlation at all. There are some enterprise products which are just complicated to use. And it's the same with product-led growth, that trend that the product is leading the growth of the product. It doesn't work for those big enterprise solutions which are too complex. You need to intervene. You need a sales team. You need a customer education program. So it's very important to say that.
For sure. And oftentimes there's softwares and systems that are already mature. You can't change that much about them, but it's like you can change the learner, the user's relationship with them and their experience with it too, even if you can't change the product.
Great. I want to move on to one of my favorite topics. I've got lots of tools that I'm passionate about, and they really help me a lot in my job. What is the one tool that you always carry in your toolbox, no matter what project you're working on?
I would say my one tool is actually analysis skills. These are really at the core of what I do. And you mentioned UX earlier. CE is actually very similar to UX in that our goal is to deeply understand the problem before designing a solution. Both practices have a foundation in design thinking and cognitive psychology. The key difference is that CE uses learning science to get the learner to do the desired action, whereas UX is often about how do we change the product itself to get the user to do the desired action. So we're coming at the same problem, usually from two very different angles. So I don't see them canceling each other out or replacing each other. They're actually very complementary.
Interesting. Yeah, that's a great parallel, and I've never thought about it before. So do you sometimes exchange with UX designers? Do you work with them?
Absolutely. And I also use UX principles in my work as well, because that's something I've had training in and I've had the opportunity to do in my past career. But it's just bringing that extra understanding of learning science and what makes something stick in somebody's head and stay there, that helps make it a customer education initiative instead of a UX initiative.
And going back to one of my first questions, which was your thinking of customer education programs like a product. This is also why you're involved in that UX space and starting to think about the problem first before bringing some solutions. Yeah,
absolutely.
Great. So you've had a long career, more than 10 years, working on customer education programs in the B2B SaaS sector. When you started in this role, was there something that you found more challenging and you did not expect that?
Yeah, I think, as I touched on earlier, just getting buy-in from executives on the value of customer education. So a lot of people have had such a poor experience in software training or the kind of corporate training. They think you're just going to throw a PowerPoint at them, and they just personally haven't had that opportunity to see what a good customer education experience looks like. So because of that, I can't really rely on that knowledge or past positive experience to kind of pitch that. So I'm really focusing on defining what those measurable goals are for the organization and the outcomes, based on their business needs that I need in order to get buy-in for whatever initiative it is that I'm trying to do.
And I guess that's understandable that people think it's just going to be 60 slides, 2 hours, sitting, watching, because that's probably how it was, maybe even when you started. So what changes have you witnessed? What does the customer education program look like now compared to those years?
It's kind of funny because I see the CE industry as kind of the same place that UX was about 10 years ago, which is it's a very good time to be part of this industry, but also nobody knows what you're talking about. So it's kind of painful sometimes. And it's been growing steadily for a few years, but the pandemic really opened the doors because people realized that having the customers sit on a Zoom call for 8 hours to get training was just not a viable solution. And with the future of work looking more and more remote first every day, I see no limit to the potential for this industry to help address the challenges that are going to come with that.
What does a customer program look like now? Let's say I'm remote and I just starting with a new B2B SaaS product. What does it look like? Is it, you said, blended learning, so mix of live sessions and on demand? Is it videos? Is it practice?
It's really whatever it is those particular learners need to interact and to do those tasks in that particular software. So it can encompass everything from the emails that they get as a beginning user. It can be in-app help. It can be videos, help documentation, live sessions, recorded sessions, on-demand webinars, interactive activities, scenarios, or even things where you have a simulation of your software that you're able to test out yourself before you go into your actual software and muck things up. So there's just a huge range of, interventions that we can apply, and it just really depends what that particular learner needs.
Do TikTok videos work as training materials?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's really, a lot of the time, good learning is meeting the learners where they're at. So if you have a young audience and TikTok is the way that they like to learn things, then you should absolutely be on TikTok.
Right. I think that's very important what you've just said, that because when I thought initially of customer education program, I only thought about the training part, but I did not include the documentation. I did not include the webinars, the emails that you send when a user joins. Because I'm just used to doing all of that myself as a product manager. So thank you. I want someone like you.
It does sound like you could use some help, yeah.
If as a product manager I don't have help, or if I've got a team like you and that the technological landscape is evolving. So what do you think the biggest opportunities, either to make us more efficient in creating those customer education programs or in the way we deliver them to customers, thanks to innovations like artificial intelligence, virtual reality, Web3? The
potential for these technologies is quite amazing, and especially interested in AR and VR. I find that one of the biggest challenges that CE experts have is having an opportunity for the learners to actually practice the skills that they've learned. This is so important to make sure that learning sticks in your brain, is that you actually do something. You don't just absorb information, but you try to use that information that you just learned. So especially if your product has any kind of real life component to it, then having the opportunity to practice safely in an AR or VR environment is going to give you the opportunity to try things out before you have to go do it on a real life piece of equipment, for example.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Definitely a good use case for AR and VR. So now we've got another product manager, Clovis, who you know already, who is asking you a question. So let's hear it.
Hi, I'm Clovis. I'm a product manager based out of Vancouver in Canada, and I would love to hear your thoughts on the following question. What are some ways product and customer education can work together to drive feature adoption? And how can we demonstrate the value of that partnership?
I think it's so crucial for product and CE to have alignment in order for them to both be successful. Ideally, CE can be informed from the early stages of product or feature ideation so that we can work in parallel to develop the strategy that is needed to support that product by the time it's released. It's one of those things where it's like sometimes product likes to keep things under their hat a little bit until the last minute because, we don't want the salespeople talking about it or something like that. But we're really your partner in making that launch successful. So the earlier we know, the better. And it's also important to keep in mind that CE teams are usually running pretty lean. Like maybe there's a few people in an organization that has 10 product managers, for example, right? So the more time we have to help you, the better. And I would say the value is demonstrated when that product is released and the customers are utilizing those learning resources to use the product successfully. So that you actually can see those adoption metrics. What you don't want to see is a lot of support tickets from customers complaining that the product doesn't work because they actually just don't know how to use it. Or customers asking for training on something when you could have anticipated, hey, these people will probably need training on this because it's quite new and different than what they've done before. And you could proactively design that and provide that at the same time that you release that feature. a lot of times what I've seen when that alignment isn't there is that you're doing catch up. You put out the product, you get the complaints or requests, and you're like, oh, scramble, make something, hurry up to put it out there. But it's like, is that really the best customer experience when you could have anticipated that before?
Perfect. And I believe you have a question for me.
Yeah, the question for you is, do you feel like product managers consider those client education needs when they're planning features? And if not, why? Or how is that usually addressed? You said that this is a lot of the stuff that you're doing, so I'm just really curious to see into your world a little bit.
Right. So this is going to be a personal answer. I don't represent all product managers, but from what I've seen, if you work in a startup or you're launching a new product, and especially if that product is complex, so B2B complex product, so it needs education, which is what I'm working on right now. I'm working with data, and you may think data is simple. Well, first understanding the data and then being able to use the data to get that value, it's actually really hard. So yes, I think about it, but I think about it because I don't have anybody else doing it. So I have no choice. So yes. And I think about it through how we're going to onboard the customers, which live sessions, which on-demand sessions. I'm currently planning the webinars as well, whether it's about new features or just some webinars for beginners, for example. So yes, I'm doing all of this. But I think most generally for more established companies, product managers are more involved in everything that sits in the product. So the in-app help and the onboarding flow, yes. And especially that is such a trend right now that lots of companies are moving to product-led growth. So they need that onboarding flow to be really smooth so that users realize the value as quickly as possible. So yes, there's a lot of thinking in that. Yes, I would say mostly for product managers who do it themselves, mostly for people who are trying to do product-led growth. In the middle, I'm not so sure. But what I've had is in one of my previous roles, I had the support team, so the customer support team, being guardian of, do you have everything ready? And have you made sure you've provided the right material? Because otherwise they wouldn't let us release. So in that case, you've got no choice.
That's so funny. It's funny how each company is different, where sometimes the product team decides when they release, sometimes it's other teams, sometimes there has to be like a consensus. But yeah, there's always kind of that last little moment of like, oh, are we ready? Do we have everything? I love it.
There is PM, technical writer, there's you, and we said that the roles overlap. So how can I, as a product manager, avoid stepping on your toes? Because I'm sure it would be very frustrating.
For sure. I think it's actually the other way around, is that I'm more concerned about stepping on your toes because I'm the new person coming in. I'm taking over a function usually that was handled by other people. And it can be confusing to know who is responsible for making decisions and carrying out the work. Like, I could just think of like with marketing, it's like when you're talking about customer emails, there's often customer marketing functions that are, we're sending emails for this and this and this. And what are you sending emails for? And we don't want to overload people with emails. And so I actually think it's up to the leadership team to think about these things when they're bringing in somebody like me to identify the work to be done, to make the boundaries and responsibilities clear, and also to identify those opportunities for collaboration. Because I think that we are stronger working together than working in parallel and silo. And I think that the more we can do that, especially early on in a strategy project, the better.
Yeah, and that's a very good point about being coordinated with the marketing team, because I had this scenario where I want to send emails with my users, but they've already received an email from marketing. So we definitely need to coordinate that.
All the time.
We've talked about customer education programs, but what about internal training and enablement? Do you deal with this? Should we apply exactly the same principles?
Absolutely. So I would consider internal training and enablement, especially for customer-facing roles. So your sales team, your customer success team, anybody who's talking to the customer, as a component of a good CE strategy. And that's because the strategy is only going to be as effective as the people who are carrying it out in the real world. And you don't want to have the situation come up where you put all these training and resources available for your customers and your customers know more than the person that they're talking to on your team. It's just not a good look.
I had this. Is this bad? It wasn't my fault. I mean, somehow, yes, because I'm a product manager, but no, you're right, definitely. And when I started in product, I was a super user, and I can tell that users sometimes know more about the product because they're there day in, day out than the people who work actually on the product.
Yeah. And what happens if you don't include internal enablement in your strategy is that those people will be using those customer resources anyway because they need the information and they want the latest and greatest, right? They're going to grab whatever's available. But the reality is that their roles and their goals are going to be slightly different than your customers. Even though they may be using the same parts of the product, they're going to be using it in different ways and for different purposes. And they're also, the level of starting information is probably going to be different than a brand new customer, right? So you can adapt a lot of what you do for customers for those internal teams to save you some time, but you really should look at them as a separate audience and create those materials and resources for them independently.
Different personas, product thinking again.
Exactly.
Final part of the interview with fire questions. I make several propositions and you choose one of them and you may want to elaborate. The first one, on demand or live?
I'm going to choose all of them because I like to have all of these in my toolbox. So I'll tell you why though. On demand is more convenient, especially when you're serving customers in multiple time zones. It's often faster to create. But a well-designed live session can be much more engaging, especially if you include activities, opportunities for discussion, those kinds of things in part of your session. If you're just going to do a presentation and a demo and people are just going to sit there, you might as well record it because that's not really worth having a live session for.
Free or paid for training?
So in product, you often see some features as out of the box or included and some as premium or add-ons, right? So a CE program can be developed in the same way. And what it really depends on is whether the company considers CE to be a cost center or a revenue generating department and what problems the company is hoping to solve with CE. If the problem is we want to make more money, we want people to upgrade and, use more of the product, then maybe you want to do paid training. But if your problem is people are not adopting straight out of onboarding and they're churning too fast, maybe some free training is worth investing in so that we can get that adoption up.
Video or written documentation?
It kind of depends on who your learners are in their learning journey and what they're trying to learn. Video can be great to introduce concepts at a high level with more detailed information captured in written documents. And I'll give you an example. Nobody who is an experienced user of a system wants to watch a 20-minute video on how to do a task when they could have skimmed a help article and read it in 2 minutes. They will be annoyed.
Okay, the next one I'm getting you to choose because you're kind of keeping
yeah,
the questions.
I told you I want them all.
In person or remote?
I would say that with the current climate and what we're doing right now, we're going to see more and more remote. But the exception is if your client is trying to do something in person, they may get more value out of in-person training. So for example, a customer who is trying to assemble and test robots for a factory assembly line, getting in-person training and hands-on experience with that is going to make a lot more difference than a customer who's using accounting software in a browser, for example.
Individual contributor or manager?
Now, this one, there's no question in my mind. Hire the most experienced person you can afford. And if you can't afford an experienced person, hire a consultant to do the strategy work and make a plan for you. And as part of the plan, they can advise you on hiring or upskilling some less experienced people to implement the program. There are so many people who come into CE like I did from customer success. They're just on the job, learning, trying to figure things out. But without that foundational knowledge of learning science and the ability to do a really deep problem analysis, they can only get so far. Don't put that on somebody's shoulders unless you're also going to support them to get the education and training they need to be able to do a really good job.
I love that. Hire the person you can afford with the best possible skills, definitely. Let's wrap up by your top tips for a product manager who wants to start a customer education program.
So what I would say is to talk to your fellow leaders in customer success and marketing because the odds are they are already thinking of the exact same thing. And you can put together a combined proposal for your executive team that will help address the needs across multiple teams. You're going to get more bang for your buck that way. Doing that will also give you a great foundation for helping that CE expert succeed in their role if you already have that cross-departmental alignment and a plan that is encompassing needs for multiple teams when they come in.
Sounds like a brilliant first step. And it most of the time starts actually when people give advice at the end of a podcast by talk to the right people. Yes, let's talk first.
I'm not surprised at all. I'm not surprised at all.
If people have enjoyed this podcast and they want to carry on the conversation with you, how can they contact you?
Yeah, I'd love to connect with anyone on LinkedIn.
Look, it's been a fantastic interview because this is one of my favorite topics, but I have never discussed it in a podcast yet because I just found nobody. So thank you so much for being on the podcast, and you've given lots of practical tips to be tactical, but also strategic. You've given lots of examples. It's been really insightful. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me. I had a great time with you.
Thank you everyone for taking the time to listen to this podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends and colleagues and rate it on your favorite podcast platform. If you have suggestions for topics and guests or any feedback, you can write to Magali Pellissier at hotmail.fr.